That's the thing. It's like, is it a value system? Is it a way in which you live your life? Is it a way that you just have acted for so long that it is a part of you and you can't expect that person to change who they are at this very fundamental core level, even if it is doing something to harm you or the relationship? I think that that's the question. And that's what I've run into in the past, in both being somebody who's requesting change and somebody who has requested change of me, that it's like when those two things are at odds with one another, I think that's kind of when you really are at an impasse in a relationship.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jace.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about what to do when a partner has asked you to change. Maybe it's a small change in behavior, a partner asking you to be a little more communicative via text, or asking you to take a turn with planning the next date. Or maybe it's something big, fundamental, and more challenging. A partner telling you they can no longer be a listening ear to your breakup processing, or a partner asking you to completely change how you show up during conflict. Either way, it can be challenging to feel the request for change. So today, we'll dive into how we deal with feelings that come up when we're asked to change, as well as evaluating what is and isn't acceptable for a partner to ask us to change. If you're interested in learning about our fundamental communication tools as well, we reference them on the show all the time. You can check out our first few episodes for those, but we also have them in beautiful, polished book form. That's Multiamory Essential Tools for Modern Relationships. It covers our most used communication tools for all types of relationships, and you can find links to buy it in paper form, ebook form, and audiobook form at multiamory.com/book or wherever you get your books.
Has anybody romantically ever asked you to change? Not like have they ever romantically in a romantic way?
Okay.
No. Someone you're romantic with asked you to change, big or small.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you want to tell me about it?
My partner asked me to be monogamous after being non-monogamous.
That's a big one.
Well, yeah,
That was a big one.
Categorize that as a big one. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I asked a partner recently, can you maybe like jab at me like in a funny like way a little bit less, because sometimes
Yeah, I've
hurts a
had
little.
that conversation.
yeah, like I know that sometimes partners, I think, or just people in general, they think that they can joke in that way and it's chill. It's not gonna, I'm not really jabbing at anything that's hard for them, but sometimes it does hurt after a while. So I was like, hey,
Yeah.
maybe this is a request, you can say no, but do you think maybe you could do that a little bit less? Because sometimes it does hurt a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes I've had to ask male partners specifically to be like,
Correct.
hey, the way that you are socialized to joke with and bond with your male friends is not the same
How you
as
should do
how
with
you
me.
should do it with me. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I feel like one that's come up on both sides of being asked to change or asking someone else to change has to do with amount of PDA, like public displays of affection when we're together.
Interesting.
And I feel like it's gone both ways in both different situations, kind of depending on the social situation that we're in or around family or in different contexts of that, like, can you change the way you are about touching me? Or them asking that, like, can you be more affectionate so people actually think we're together and we're not just like siblings or something? You know, like it can really go both ways, which is interesting.
Can you stop calling me your sister? It's not kinky.
right.
Hey, sister. Yeah. Okay.
No, I had a partner who got upset that people would sometimes ask if we were related, if we were siblings, if they saw us like while we were at work and we worked together. And to be fair, I do feel like we did look a bit like each other. So it wasn't just totally coming out of nowhere, but she took that as like, you're not showing enough affection for me in public so that people realize we're that type of relationship and not this other one.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you were like, we just look alike. It's fine.
I was asked a few years ago by a partner who sat me down, and this was a few days before Valentine's Day, and he sat me down basically asking like, hey, can you like take Valentine's Day like seriously, actually?
Oh,
what?
You're not
Yeah.
a sentimental one about that relationship holiday.
Yeah, no, he was
That's
basically kind of
fascinating.
like, there's been some years past where, you know, you've kind of brushed it off as nothing, but it's actually kind of important to me, and like holidays in general are more important to me, and so I would like if you maybe like took it a little bit more seriously.
Wow.
I did not take it very well. I got very defensive, and
Oh.
but once I got over the defensiveness and calmed down, then it was an opportunity for me to examine, yeah, what is that about? And was able to open up and be more vulnerable about like, yeah, I think I picked this up from my family of origin, and how non-sentimental and extremely pragmatic they are about holidays
Everything?
and everything,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So yeah, that's not the most recent time I was asked to change, but that's something that pops up into my brain.
And that sounds like a great segue into why we're doing this whole episode.
Yeah, it's so funny because I think that we can understand that it is dangerous to just expect someone to fundamentally change, or just expect that someone is going to change on our behalf.
I think it's a little scary to ask a person to change or to request that they do a different type of behavior. And I have found over time, all of the dating life that I have had, that it's almost impossible to expect somebody to change and to actually see them implement that unless they really want to do it themselves.
And that's the interesting piece is, yeah, we've often talked about if you're with someone kind of with this expectation that they're going to change a fundamental part of themselves, they're not going to. So don't just keep banking on that happening. But at the same time, being part of a relationship, especially a longer term one, there will be change. There will be accommodations that are made from both people and behavior changes going both directions in order to have a healthy relationship at all. So it's this weird catch-22 of like, we will change and that is an important part, but also don't go in like expecting someone to change drastically for you, especially their fundamental nature.
And yeah, I think the likelihood increases that either you're going to have to ask someone to change or someone's going to ask you to change as you entwine more together, as you take on more projects together. That could include everything like caregiving, parenting, managing a shared living space together, communicating around having multiple partners. That, yeah, the more entwinement, I think there's just more opportunities where we're going to have to ask for behavior changes and make modifications.
That's, I think, an interesting distinction as well. Behavior change versus like fundamental personality change.
So we will get to that.
Yes, I'm very interested to dive into that because that, I think, is the real crux of this is a thing that is very difficult for somebody to change unless they really want to. Whereas behavior, I think, like what we just talked about, Dedeker, like, hey, you maybe poke at me a little bit more than I would like. Can you do that a little bit less? That's a very like specific behavior that I think is a little bit easier perhaps to remember and to stop oneself from doing over and over again.
So you think like maybe an easier change to make?
Yes. Whereas if you have a fundamental like intrinsic value system in place that somebody is asking you to change, I think that that is extremely challenging.
And with that said, it can be hard sometimes to tell which of those it is, and also how to have those conversations, which is why the skills to ask for change well and the skills to receive those requests for change are so important to maintaining healthy and sustainable relationships.
Well, where I wanted to start was I got curious about, in relationships, who is it that asks for change? And what do people tend to ask for in relationships? I found this unintentionally funny study, 2009. It's titled Desired Change in Couples, Gender Differences and Effects on Communication. This was published in the Journal of Family Psychology.
Doesn't sound funny yet. I'm waiting for the punchline.
No. So they surveyed 453 heterosexual couples. It was all couples who were either married or living together and who also had a 3 to 7 year old child.
Wow.
Now, they
That's very
found
specific.
that, yes, yeah. So also it's like hetero parents of small children. They found that what women tended to ask for were they wanted greater increases from their partner in things like their partner's parental involvement. They wanted their partner to increase their emotional and companionate behaviors, like as in, I want more time together, I want more attention, I want you to start interesting conversations with me, etc. Or they wanted their male partners to help more around the house and in planning their lives. The men asked for more sex.
Ain't that the truth?
That was it. That was it. That was
what I
what they found.
100% of respondents, or just like an overwhelming majority, or what are we talking about here?
An overwhelming majority. Yeah. So, okay. And it's so funny that reading through this study, the study's conclusion, literally in the study's conclusion, they were like, hey, media people covering this, don't just say that women want all these things and men just want sex. Don't say that. Don't say that.
And
They
yet-
did clarify.
yet-
Well, no, they did clarify that what was actually happening in the data is that men and women they did want the same things, actually, in pretty much every domain. Like either they wanted like increased attention, increased time together, or decreased, I don't know, criticism or things like that. Like both genders wanted significant change in the same direction, just not as much. So for example, they say that both men and women desire more sex, but men want even more change than women do. And that both men and women desire increases in spending time together, but women want that change even more than the men do.
Interesting.
Right? Or want a bigger amount of change. Does that make sense?
Sure. And it seems like at first it might seem like we want different things, and so we're at odds, but maybe we actually do want the same things, just in these different amounts, and that feels easier to resolve.
Yeah, they were saying that this is ultimately it's just about relative amount of change, and maybe that's easier for two people to get on the same page about, as opposed to it being diametrically opposed desires. Right? I mean, that does happen in relationships. Sometimes it's like one person wants more sex and one person wants less sex. And that's
Sure.
a
Yeah.
little bit more of a trickier situation than we do both want more sex. It's just like maybe you want way, way more and I only want a little bit more.
I'm curious, and we won't have the answers to this, but I always think about in studies like this where we're focusing on gender and we're focusing on heterosexual couples, there's this kind of how much of this is a result of the enculturation of the people involved. And what I mean by that is I could see a world where both people, what they want is more intimacy and connection. But to the men, they feel like, well, what that means is sex. Like the way that I get intimacy and connection is through sex.
And
the
that's-
way
yeah,
I get
that's a
your
whole
attention
other
is sex.
Topic.
And for the women, they might be socialized to think that means something else. So that's,
Yes.
that's an equally fascinating
Yeah.
topic.
So I thought that
Absolutely.
was interesting. Yeah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, and this is just anecdotal. I didn't pull any research for this specifically, but about what comes up for us when we're asked to change, whether that's us personally or more generally speaking, because I think that I'm having a hard time recalling a situation where a partner has asked me to change a behavior and where my instant reaction has been just like pure joy. Oh, I'm so glad.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe if I was like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that I wasn't doing that. Like, of course, that's so easy, right? If it felt like a very easy lift. But I think most of the other times it's brought up more negative, more troubling feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There have been some times where it's like, oh, I was actually holding myself back from that because I thought you didn't want it. Oh, great. Let's do more of that. But you're right. The majority of the time, I feel like for me, I tend to go to more often than defensiveness to this feeling of like, oh, fuck, like something's wrong with me. Oh, gosh,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I've really screwed this up. I've failed you. I've let you down. I think that tends to be my most common reaction. Not always, but often.
I have a little bit of both. I've been defensive at times, and I've also been like, oh shit, like that doesn't sound great that I'm doing that. I'm so sorry. Let me try to fix that behavior. So yeah, it can be like a lot of discomfort, even maybe like a little bit of sadness or embarrassment at times.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Though also sometimes it's like frustration of like, no, but I am doing that thing. I'm
Yes.
consciously putting a lot of effort into doing
You
that
asked me to
thing,
do that
and you
last
think I
week, and I
don't.
very
Yeah.
specifically tried to, and you're not noticing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Or just, I think the discomfort of disagreement, if you're like, your partner asks you to change a behavior and you feel like, I don't think that's a reasonable request to make of me, then
Yeah.
that can bring a whole other host of feelings along with it. And I think fundamentally for me, it's like this feeling of, oh my God, I thought we were on the same page and we're actually totally not on the same page in our relationship.
Yeah, there can be like
Yeah.
that rug pull feeling of,
Yeah.
oh, I thought I knew where we both stood, and now I feel like I don't know anything about what's been going on.
My ex often would ask me to not talk about our relationship on the show, for instance. And so I felt like, and I don't know, dear listener, what y'all think, but I felt like I really tried to minimize it, or if I alluded to it, I did it like very gently. But I know that there were still things that he picked out that I said that were like terrible, awful things to say. Like that I felt resentful of him, for instance, even though I was just essentially trying to figure out like, hey, I'm having these feelings of resentment. How do I solve those feelings? How do I figure out a way past those feelings? And I used our relationship as an example, but apparently that was a big problem.
And yeah, that is an interesting case where, from your point of view, you're kind of throwing yourself under the bus of being like, I have this problem I want to work on. But he interpreted it more as, hey, you said this shitty thing about me.
That was my sense of it.
Yeah. So, and I can see other cases where you're not talking on a podcast, but where that kind of thing happens, that to one person, it's like, I was showing affection in doing this thing. And to the other person, it's, I felt like you were hurtful by doing this thing. Right? I guess maybe in a way like the poking that you were talking about could fall into that category.
Oh, yeah,
where, like,
totally.
the two people saw the same action as a completely different emotional feeling, right? A different connection or disconnection.
I think there's another tricky thing here, and we'll get to this more at the end of the episode when we're talking about what is acceptable for someone to ask you to change and what isn't. That sometimes a partner may make a request for change in your behavior, and for some reason the way it lands on you feels like, oh my God, they want me to fundamentally change who I am, when maybe that's not actually what they're asking. So for instance, like in your case, Emily, I could see a version of that going down where you ask your partner, hey, can you ease up a little bit in the way that we joke around with each other? And maybe for some reason that hits some kind of nerve with him and it feels like a threat to who he is, right? Like, how could you ask me to change my sense of humor or change the way that I show up in relationship and like my playfulness, right? That depending on particular topics, and I think we all have certain more sensitive topics and more sensitive areas of our identity or weird things that we've attached our identity to, where if a partner brushes up against it, it can feel extremely, extremely threatening. And I think that's when these like really big emotions come out, like rage and like really deep shame or really deep sadness or indignation.
I will say, early on in a relationship, because I think that was the first time I've ever requested something like that of him. And we've been dating for like 8 months or something, so not a huge amount of time. But I was a little worried at what his response would be. And I was pleasantly surprised that he was like, sure, sorry about that.
Great.
Yeah.
Off to a good start.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was pleased because I think when you have relationships where when you ask somebody to change, they have a very different response or a very volatile response. Sometimes you tend to think, okay, everyone's going to act like that, and maybe I shouldn't ask somebody to change in any way. But at times people can surprise you.
Yeah. So we're going to go on to talking about what we can actually do and deal with these feelings, as well as some research on that. But first, we're going to take a quick break to talk about some sponsors of this show. We really appreciate them for helping support this show to keep this coming to all of y'all out there in the world. And we appreciate you for taking a moment to listen to the ads and check them out if they seem interesting to you, or at the very least, go click on the links in our episode description, use those promo codes. That does help our show. And of course, if you would rather directly join our community and get access to things like ad-free episodes, our video processing groups, and just an amazing community of people to support each other and discuss episodes, you can go to multiamory.com/join and sign up there.
So when this happens, whether your partner has asked something big of you, something small of you, and whether you're having big feelings or small feelings, how do we deal with the feelings that can come up? So I want to make a callback to the research that I referenced in the last episode, our cognitive reappraisal episode, where we covered this 2022 study, When We're Asked to Change, the role of suppression and reappraisal in partner change outcomes, published in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships. So this was the study where they recorded these interviews with couples where one person, the requesting partner, was given a minute to think about what they wanted their partner to change, and then they were given 1 minute to tell their partner. Then the change target, the partner who was being asked to change, was given a minute to respond. They were given a few more minutes together to talk freely, and then they were released into the wild, essentially.
And then they also followed up with them over time too, right?
Yes. I actually found an interview with the researchers on this blog, therapytips.org, where they talked about how even though the study was looking at emotion regulation in the change target, the person who is being asked to change. They also looked at emotion regulation strategies in the partner who's requesting the change as well. And so they found that the partner who's requesting the change sometimes may choose to emotionally regulate through suppression. Like they may try to conceal or minimize their negative emotions about the changing partner, or conceal their negative emotions about what they would like them to change. So, for example, they shared that the requesting partner may hide how much their partner's behavior upsets or frustrates them, or they may act like the change request is less serious than it actually is. Or they may hide negative feelings like anger or sadness that could come from feeling like their partner is not making enough effort toward pursuing the change, or their partner's not actually trying to meet their request. As for how this played out when they did this other analysis where they were tracking these couples week to week to report, so this was after they had their little conversation discussing what the person wanted them to change, and then they followed them week to week to track how that change effort was going. They found that the requesting partner who suppressed their emotions more than other participants reported that their changing partner was further from their ideal over the course of 8 weeks.
Whoa.
This suggests some potential drawbacks of requesting partners suppressing their emotions. But of course, further research is needed. They give all their same caveats.
Right.
So what do you take away from that?
The first thought that jumped out to me was, if you're suppressing those emotions because you're trying to stay calm and be reasonable in what you're requesting, that it's possible the other partner hears that, but then doesn't take it that seriously, or doesn't give it as much weight as you want them to, because you were hiding that from them, because they couldn't see how much this affected you.
Or maybe you were worried about the feelings they're going to have in being asked to change, right? And so that's why you would hold back, or...
Yeah, totally. That's what I mean, though, that as the receiving partner, if the other person was holding back their emotions, so you don't know how much this means to them, you might put less effort into it. So like you mentioned, that the person who asked, if they suppressed their emotions, felt like the other person didn't do as much to change. I wonder how much of that might actually be true, that just the message didn't land as hard on the other person, that this change matters.
Yeah, something with my last big breakup, something I spent a lot of time on with my therapist was, looking back, I had a lot of regrets around, I really didn't want to be giving ultimatums to my partner. And I didn't want to say something to him like, this needs to change, or I don't think I can be in this relationship anymore. I was so worried about, because I don't want to be a person who's threatening a breakup, because that's such shitty behavior, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to feel like I was manipulating. And so I think I overcorrected with a number of things where I so hid how serious this was for me that, I think the message, I wouldn't say that I was chill about it. I would not go that far, Chase.
Okay.
I would say that, I don't know, that was a big, a question I had for her, was how could I have delivered that message without just sounding like an asshole? And she wasn't that helpful. She was just like, I'm from LA. I would have just said it.
Well,
Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that it is important to be honest about your emotions, and to also express that this is very meaningful to me and this matters a lot. And if I don't see a change, there's going to be an issue there. And if, a person doesn't know that, then it probably becomes that much easier for them to just stray back into the same existing behavior patterns and not truly see, okay, this is something that my partner is really not okay with. I should make an effort to change because I care about them and I love them and I want them to be okay.
And I'm also curious now, since you mentioned, Dedeker, that they observed that the asker, the requester, if they suppressed their emotions, they reported that they didn't think their partner was changing enough or fast enough. I do wonder how much could be that result of, I didn't get it out. I don't feel like I clearly expressed myself, and so I still feel some upset about it, even if maybe objectively, however you could measure that, which is hard, maybe objectively there was the same amount of change, and it really was just they weren't able to perceive it as much because they were still holding on to the feelings they didn't express, or they didn't let themselves show.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. Yeah,
sometimes getting those feelings out there can help, and maybe not diminish them, but just at least get it outside of your body and having to process it internally. And that external processing can hopefully lead to some, I guess, diminishing of the intensity of that feeling.
Well, and yet at the same time, okay, so the takeaway is like, yeah, you should be emotionally honest when you're making a change request of your partner, while also not straying into just being emotionally punitive or toxic or abusive or aggressive when making a change request.
Yeah.
And I think also there's a piece here where if you're the one being asked to change, I think this indicates like it is important that you take the time and you bring the curiosity to like really understand where this is coming from for the other person and really understand what they actually feel about it as much as they are able to share with you. Sometimes that's hard to get out of a partner if they have complicated feelings around it already.
Yeah, absolutely.
But okay, but here's the deal is when I was writing this episode, I ran into this topsy-turvy, which is that I wanted to write this episode to focus on these change targets, when we are the change target, when we are asked to change. But so much of the research and the literature and the advice out there is focused on the asker, on the requester.
Really?
Yes.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Really? You don't like, why wouldn't you have guessed that?
I don't know. I guess I would assume that most people would think, well, asking for them to change is the easy part. It's like, how do you change or how do you accept that is the hard part or the complicated part.
No,
But
it makes, I think it makes sense.
It does make sense,
Yes.
but I didn't expect that going into this.
Yeah.
How do
'cause,
you
like,
ask well enough to get what it is that you
Exactly.
want? Yeah.
Exactly, because I
sure.
think that's how so many people, and I've been there, feel desperate. Like, oh my God, my partner is driving me nuts. How can I get them to stop doing this thing? How can I
yeah, you're right.
ask? Can I unlock the key of how to effectively ask them for change? How do I convince them to change? And so I think that's where most of the resources out there focus.
That does make sense because I could also see those are the people reaching out for help too, because they're sitting there
Exactly.
thinking about it longer. Usually, them the target of change. Who often it's like whatever the knee-jerk reaction was, they either do or they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That they're more likely to be the ones searching for studies and research and therapy tips and stuff like that if they're trying to ask for change.
Yes. So that was a surprising roadblock that I ran into. So that's why I thought that maybe we can look at what the research says are the building blocks of an effective change request, and then looking at it through the lens of being the change target. Like the idea that you can maybe use this as a rubric as you're processing a request for change that came from your partner. Again, because of what I talked about earlier, that sometimes just a request for change itself can trigger all kinds of surprising stuff and surprising emotions. And I thought that maybe having a rubric might help for you to be able to sort out, does this feel like a reasonable request and I'm just having a big reaction to it or not? My intention with this is not to give you an exercise to like catch your partner or grade your partner, right?
And how good did they ask me?
On how yeah, did they ask me in the correct way? You know,
Right.
it's not to give you an excuse to completely disregard your partner because they didn't do it 100% correctly. It's
Oh, I like that. That's good. Yeah. It's like, well, I would change, but you didn't actually ask me correctly, so tough.
it's
So never mind.
yeah, the point of this is to just help offer some guidelines. Jace would call them some buoys to help you through some of these difficult emotions that could come up. So this list that I made, it was just like 4 aspects that you might look for in a request for change. And this list was informed by 2 research studies. One is from 2009, the differential association between change request qualities and resistance, problem resolution, and relationship satisfaction in the Journal of Family Psychology, and a 2020 study, the distinct effects of empathic accuracy for a romantic partner's appeasement and dominance emotions, published in Psychological Science. I promise that my list is sexier and easier to parse.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I need to give a note. I need to give a note to some of these researchers. It is possible to come up with cuter, more fun titles.
Cute.
We've definitely had them on the show
This is
before.
known as cuter, please. Cuter.
We've had a couple
please.
cute ones.
It's
yeah,
true.
I'm asking you to change.
How much does it mean to you that they do this?
Right. Yeah, you're right. Maybe I'm asking how much this affects me. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good. I need to really do some introspection on
Okay,
this
well,
now.
here's the 4 things that I put on this rubric. Was the request for change collaborative? As in, when your partner came to you, were they able to incorporate we language versus you language? As in, hey, we need to stop giving in to them versus saying, you just need to say no. Now, in my
Meaning,
mind, I
for the
imagine,
kids, I'm assuming.
yeah, I imagine the kids could be, I don't know, your former mafia crew that are threatening
that's
you. I
fair.
don't,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
That was pulled from, one of these studies showed that then, of course, they were looking at hetero couples again, that both husbands and wives' change requests framed as you need to do this or that, resulted in an increased likelihood of immediate partner resistance.
And that
Yeah,
seems
that makes
obvious when you
sense.
say it. That makes so much sense. It's like, yeah, you need to do this. Well, back off. I do what I want.
So that could be a clue that if you're noticing immediate partner resistance in yourself, it could be that. And again, to just really beat the dead horse a lot, it doesn't mean you get to throw this back into your partner's face and say, well, you messed up on the language, therefore I don't have to listen to you. It could be an opportunity to reframe and come back to the conversation and saying, hey, I think that there are things that we can both do to help make this easier. And this is a thing that I'm committed to doing, for instance.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. It's like the most Zen comeback.
Hopefully not passive aggressive. I'm not intending for it to be passive aggressive.
No.
I'm just-
Hopefully not. No, but I'm thinking about like when I feel like I've been at my best, I feel like I could have that moment of I get a request that's me and kind of you take it in and then, okay, what if we find a way to do whatever, to enact some change together, like that you can change the you into we, but that takes a lot of resistance to not resistance, takes a lot of introspection and awareness to not just go to defensive right away. Right.
We are. That's
Yes,
a severance.
the we
That's
are.
a severance.
Yes.
Okay, good.
That is a severance.
Yes.
Yeah, it makes me think of an example. I think I was reading this in an advice column where a woman, I think it's a pretty typical situation. A woman was expressing frustration that she felt like her husband was not helping enough around the house. And that what would really set her off is her husband would say things like, oh, did we empty the trash last night? Or like, oh,
And he meant, did you?
do we still need to, did we ever figure out what we need to put on the grocery list? Right. And where, of course, she wanted to clap back with like, what do you mean? Like, it's you or me. Like, we got to figure that out. Right. And that the advice was, yes, just return it. Like, no, you're right. We didn't take out the trash. And let's
Why
talk
don't you
about
do
how,
that?
let's talk about how we need to manage this together. Right.
Oh, I
It's like,
see.
kind of like follow
Good.
that into a conversation.
That's good.
About
Yeah.
that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. The next thing on this rubric was the request for change positive? Or the way that I tend to frame this to my clients, especially when I'm working with couples, is the request for change affirmative rather than negative? And I don't mean like positive, like sunshine and rainbows, but as in expressing what it is that you do want, as opposed to just expressing what it is that you don't want. So the
Yeah.
researchers call this an increasing request rather than a decreasing request.
Yeah.
The way this looks in practice would be something like saying to your partner, I would love for us to have more non-screen time together, as opposed to saying to your partner, you have to turn off your phone or else you're not allowed to come over to my place anymore.
I have laid down an ultimatum similar to that before, where it's if you're going to sleep over at my place, you can only hit your snooze button once, and then you have to get up.
Oh,
As
wow.
I was like, I will
Okay,
not
but Chase,
tolerate your
how
alarm
c-
going off over.
Wow.
How could you have framed
Dang.
that affirmatively?
Why don't we?
That's like an.
focus- No, I don't.
That's almost a decreasing request, though.
No, it was. It was
Yeah.
decreasing for sure. No, I definitely did not phrase that in a positive way, but it did land, and I think it was. An
How can we
easy
help you
enough
get out of bed
request.
after
Yeah,
the
how can
first
we-
snooze alarm
I would
Yeah.
love
in the
for
morning?
us to only experience the alarm going off once in the morning or so.
There you
I
go.
feel like now we're self-parodying.
Both of us
Yeah.
experiencing
Yeah.
this. That's fascinating.
No.
Wow.
This is something that I remember years ago when I worked at a hair salon. We had someone come in who was like a consultant who maybe worked at another salon and was talking about how they'd tried to develop a better culture and like a better feeling with their clients, with their customers, as well as with their staff. And one of their things was trying to learn to phrase everything in terms of what you want rather than what you don't want, or to phrase things in terms of what you want to move toward instead of what you want to move away from. And so an example they gave was if you're walking a client from getting their hair shampooed back over to the chair, that if there was like a cord on the ground, instead of saying, be careful not to trip on that, they would say something like, mind your step over this cord. of just kind of trying to rephrase things into a more, I guess, increasing request than a decreasing request.
Having a positive spin on everything.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there is some stuff that makes sense to it, right? Of like focusing on the positive outcome instead of the negative one, even if the result's the same. But some people can go really hard on this, and that's how this salon was.
Well, sure. And I don't want this to get confused with you can never say no or you can never have a decreasing request. Because I think, especially if it's a situation where I need to enact some kind of boundary where I can be like, I'm not going to respond to text messages after 10 o'clock that are work related. That doesn't really involve me like necessarily telling someone, hey, you need to stop sending me text messages after 10 o'clock. I'm just kind of stating this is how I'm going to deal with it. And it's not framed in a positive, affirmative way, right? It just kind of is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it makes a lot of sense, though, when requesting something of the other person, of focusing on why you want it as well. I know that in general, requests for anything land better when you also give a reason why you want the thing. And so in this example of, I would love for us to have more non-screen time together, is not just, I don't want you to look at your phone. It's that I want you to look at me, right? It's focusing on like why I even want this thing at all.
It's a bid for attention.
Yeah, a bid for connection and attention.
Yeah.
I think that's a good segue into this next part of the rubric, which is, was the request for change specific? So this research that I looked at found that requests for change that are specific, like as a request that explicitly state the action that the person should take to change, specific requests will elicit less resistance than requests that are vague, as in requests where you just simply complain about a situation without specifying what action should be taken. I feel like, Jace, you call me out on this one a lot of just complaining about something without making requests or giving suggestions.
That's why I was nodding so hard when you were reading this one.
Like a little bobblehead.
Yeah, like an example that, Dedeker, that you wrote down here I really like is the vague version of a request is something like, I'm tired of our plans always being put on the back burner and rescheduled. I want you to make me a priority. Versus the specific version of saying, when we make plans together for the next time we'll see each other, can we sit down and look at both of our calendars to double and triple check there aren't any forgotten commitments and that we're both actually available? I think that's a good example of moving to it a more clear request. Because I think so often something like that statement of, I want to feel more X, right? I want to feel more appreciated by you, seems like that's, you want me to change everything about myself, versus when you notice that I've taken out the trash, I'd like you to thank me for that and appreciate me for that. Feels like, oh, yeah, I can do that. That makes sense. Like, yeah, you deserve that. I'm sorry I haven't done that. Like, it feels doable. I think that makes a lot of sense on the receiving side to kind of get to like, what does that really mean? What does that look like?
I do think that these changes, these requests for change, that they're a little bit more tied up like in a neat little bow, a little package that is not as scary as just I'm going to throw a bone at you and say like, hey, pick this up and please do something about it. It's like a nice little neat.
Yeah, you've changed some metaphors midstream.
I'm going to literally throw like a chicken bone at you and tell you, hey, pick that up and clean it up now.
Yes, like I would like you to change and pick up this chicken bone.
I'm tired of you not picking up my chicken bones.
Versus I'm going to give you some nice vegan chicken in a package and say, here you go. Here's
okay.
It's really
no bones
nice.
Required.
Exactly. The point is that it's a softened request. It's still a request, but it doesn't feel as scary as like a change request saying, hey, you need to do this. You need to change something about yourself. It's more like, I'm seeing something that's happening, or, we need to maybe be more proactive about this thing together. You're still asking for a change and you may be like pointing it in their direction, but you're softening the language about it in order to make it more digestible and palatable to that person. And therefore, hopefully that'll create, I think, the necessary ingredients for the change to happen.
And that leads perfectly to the last one on this list, which is, was the request for change empathetic? Does your partner who's asking you to change recognize, like, if you have a feeling of shame or guilt or embarrassment or remorse that comes up, does your partner recognize that? Or do they recognize that there could be a potential for those feelings when being asked to change? So I have another direct quote. The study results indicate that a greater ability to read a partner's appeasement emotions predicts higher relationship quality. As we theorized, because of the socially constructive function of appeasement emotions, e.g., showing concern for a partner, acknowledging a personal shortcoming, accuracy for such emotions was associated with more satisfying relationships. And to translate that into layman's terms, if you are appeasing with your partner, or you feel embarrassed or bashful, and your partner accurately picks up on this, it can signal to your partner that you care about their feelings and recognize that a change request could be hurtful or awkward or uncomfortable. So I think this falls into this weird, delicate dance of, if you're too hyper attuned to not wanting to ruffle your partner's feathers when you make a change request, that could lead to you suppressing your own emotions and feeling like, I can't really indicate how upset I am about this because then that's going to upset them and I can't have that. So like, we could go too far with this. But then there's also going way too far in the other direction, which is having zero empathy for how my request might land on my partner, right?
And I think we often get there when we hit that point where we're so fed up that then our request comes with no empathy, with no compassion for how it might be received.
Yeah.
Because we're just sick and tired of this shit by the time we get to that. This is interesting. I want to go back for just a second to the specific one, again, focusing on being the one getting asked this, of noticing, like, if this feels overwhelming, something you could do is to go into being specific, of saying, what does that look like? I want to do this for you. It feels overwhelming. Like, what does that actually look like? What does that mean? Could be helpful. And then almost with this empathetic thing, it's almost that, like, as the receiving one, maybe not needing to hide your emotions or like shield them behind defensiveness, and instead being willing to show that you feel a little bit ashamed or embarrassed. You know, that there is kind of a deeper, more vulnerable emotion going on. I know that can be hard for some people to let that show, but this seems to indicate that that might then also help the person asking for change to ask it better by showing that you feel those things, or even just saying with your words, I'm having a hard time not just feeling really ashamed or embarrassed about the fact that I've done that, and then maybe work your way backward from there. Can you help me understand what that would look like specifically? So maybe could we start small, and like you using the we language and asking for specifics and looking at, like, what would the good version look like, focusing on the positive. It's almost like you can work your way back through these for
Interesting.
to bring the question asker along with you.
100%. Well, so I think, so I think that's a great way to use this sort of rubric of, how can I make this collaborative? How can I make it positive? How can I make it specific? How can I make it empathetic, even if you are the change target? I also think it's helpful to think about these things because it's totally possible that there could be a situation where you come to the conclusion that the request that your partner has made for change is totally valid, but your negative feelings are coming from the way that your partner asked it of you. And this is just, like, I think the perfect formula for switch tracking.
Yeah, I kept thinking of that over and over again while we were doing this episode.
Can you recap switch tracking for us?
So switch tracking is when, for instance, in the example of taking out the trash, when somebody says, hey, have we taken out the trash today? And the other person says, I took out the trash yesterday, and I hate the fact that you don't acknowledge all of my times that I have taken out the trash or done other things around the house, whatever. And then the first person says, okay, but the trash hasn't been taken out yet and it's starting to smell. Can you please take it out? And they're like, oh gosh, yet again, you're not acknowledging me. You're not seeing all of the work that I do around this house. How dare you? So it's like they're going on a different track, a different thing that they're seeing is incorrect about the situation, instead of staying on, like, the task at hand, staying on the initial request of, please take out the trash. They're totally switching to something else.
Yes.
So it's like the two people are having two different conversations and getting frustrated that the other one isn't responding to their conversation.
Totally.
And both of those tracks are valid things to look at, right?
Sure.
If you've identified, like, yeah, actually, maybe there's a pattern where my partner is not very specific when they have a complaint. or they're not very empathetic when they have a complaint.
So you're requesting a change about them
Well,
requesting
also,
changes.
I know. And then it just becomes fractals all the way down.
Indeed.
Yeah.
No, the important thing to remember is I think in the moment when you're being asked to change is not the moment to then immediately throw back. I didn't like the way that you asked that. Like, this is a good opportunity to hold steady. Maybe it's something that feels relatively small where like you feel like what your partner's asking is valid. You didn't like that they used you language more than we language. That could be an opportunity if you feel like you're holding steady and you're not just like spinning out emotionally, where you could try on some cognitive reappraisal for yourself, right? Like rethinking this sense of, okay, I get that maybe I didn't like the way they used this you language, but I totally get where they're coming from. And I think that maybe making this change could help strengthen our relationship. Yeah, that was difficult to hear. I can understand where my partner was coming from, though. I'm glad they at least said something rather than kept it to themselves. So if that's a situation where you feel like you can hold steady, then yeah, I think that's a great tactic to take. If it's not, this could be a cue to set aside another time with your partner, like in a radar, a check-in, to talk about how you want to handle these requests for change from each other. And it could be something like, hey, I just wanted to let you know we had that hard conversation a few weeks ago. And because of that conversation, like you requested, I went ahead, I've set up a few appointments with a therapist to talk through this thing. But I wanted you and I to process that particular talk because it was really hard. And honestly, I felt a little hurt at the time. Can we talk more about how to have these sorts of conversations?
Yeah, maybe coming up with some microscripts to break some patterns that you have. I love that. So before we get into the section on how do you evaluate, is this a valid change to be requested of me? We're going to take a quick moment to talk about some sponsors of this show. Thank you to them for sponsoring this episode. Please take a moment, check them out, use the links and the promo codes. They're also in our show description. That does support our show. And if you would rather get ad-free episodes and join our amazing community, you can go to multiamory.com/join. We would love to have you join us for some more real-time interaction in those. And all of that is part of our community at multiamory.com/join.
I want to spend this last portion of our episode talking about the ethics of being asked to change. We teased this a little bit at the top. Do the two of you think that there are changes that it's acceptable to ask a partner to make versus completely unacceptable to ask?
Oof.
You don't sound very convicted.
That's weird. Just thinking off the top of my head, it's hard for me to come up with something that I would say is like objectively in this
Unethical.
category of unacceptable to ask, but for that person might be unacceptable. Like
So you
that,
think it's more subjective?
I feel like it just depends on how tied is it to like an intrinsic value of that person versus how much is this just a behavior.
That's the thing. It's like, is it a value system? Is it a way in which you live your life? Is it a way that you just have acted for so long that it is a part of you and you can't expect that person to change who they are at this very fundamental core level, even if it is doing something to harm you or the relationship? I think that that's the question. And that's what I've run into in the past, in both being somebody who's requesting change and somebody who has requested change of me, that it's like when those two things are at odds with one another, I think that's kind of when you really are at an impasse in a relationship.
I think that we can stray into this area. I mean, whatever. Anybody can ask you anything. You don't have to say yes or no.
Sure.
Right.
Ultimately. And so there's certain things where people may ask you to change and they're probably going to be harder for you to accept that request for change. So things related to fundamental identity. That's also squishy because there are some things like somebody's sexuality, for instance, where we feel like, yeah, like you can't ask somebody to change that for your sake.
I'd like you to stop being attracted to men. That would be great. Could you just do that
just stop.
for me?
Just stop.
I would like for us to stop being attracted to men,
Okay.
right? Like,
But like when it gets into things like non-monogamy, for some people that may feel like that's a part of their identity close to the way that their sexuality might feel like part of their identity.
Yeah.
And for other people, like, people who are more ambiamorous, it may not feel like that, like that deep and intrinsic.
Yeah.
no, that's a great example.
The example that I'm thinking of is I really hoped that my personal work ethic would help a partner change the ways in which they viewed work and trying to find work and trying to be motivated in their life in general. And I realized like that I just sort of hoped that my example would be enough to move a person in a certain direction of wanting to do that more, wanting to be more interested in lifting themselves up out of the situation that they were in and had been in, quite frankly, for a long time. And I think that the moral of that story is like, again, even if you give a great example, even if you show like, yeah, I'm hustling all the time, I'm moving all the time and trying to better my life, it doesn't mean that somebody else is going to be led by that example and want to change themselves.
Well, there's so many different ways to look at that, because I imagine that, like, let's say you were with this partner and you were sharing some type of financial like maybe you were living together, and then it gets a little bit trickier around, can I ask this person to get a job, right? Or get a career or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we're both financially contributing to something, and like you not having a job or not having a career does affect me in that way, versus asking someone, I need you to develop more hustle or more motivation. That's hard.
Yeah. And when it affects like the way in which you look at them in general, then you go back to your own value system as well. It's like, do I want to be with a person who doesn't really want to hustle in their life and have a lot of like self-motivation, that's a lot harder for them, versus, does this person feel like they want to change? So it's, again, those like two competing value systems that I think can be challenging, and that ultimately one has to decide, or two people have to decide, do we want to stay in a relationship where those things are at odds?
I want to share a real pickle that I've had
Please.
around this, because I think that something that falls in the realm of maybe unacceptable to ask a partner to change could include stuff that's things about their body that they should be able to autonomously make decisions about, right?
Yeah.
Like their appearance, medical decisions that they have to make. And what I've really had a hard time with, especially with particular partners, especially male partners, is I don't think it's ethical for me to put pressure on a partner to get a vasectomy, for instance. But sometimes I don't know, I've never directly asked anybody to like get a vasectomy, but I've really wanted to. Like,
No,
I've really heavily
that is
suggested it.
interesting.
Can you
sometimes.
ask? But there's like an ask versus saying, you need to make this change. Those are two
Sure.
very different things. One is a request and one is sort of I mean, they're both requests, I guess, but one feels a little bit more dire. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. And sure, like, of course, I can ask whatever, and as long as people feel like they're free and autonomous to be able to say no, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Because it could be easy to come to this and try to make these clear, hard line distinctions, right? Of like, if it's something about their health or their body, you can't ask them that. Like, that falls into the category of unacceptable. But I think if we think about real life and real connections, there's a context where telling someone you should lose weight is a really shitty thing to say to them. And there's other contexts where, hey, you generally are a lot happier when you're exercising. I know you've stopped doing that this last year. I really think it'd be good for you to do that again. Let's do that together. That to me doesn't feel weird, right? It's just like there's a whole world in between those two, right? Like there's all sorts of different nuance based on why they're feeling the way they are, how they're feeling. And so I'm hesitant for us to put anything into this category of like never or always okay.
But that's what the people want, Jace.
I know they want the clear answers. I know, and they won't get them here. So sorry, everybody. But I do think that it's worth, when you're approaching things that have to do with somebody else's body or someone else's medical decisions, to at least give it that extra thought of like, am I crossing a line? Like, am I going outside of trying to take away their own bodily autonomy or something? And I think like the vasectomy thing,
To be clear, I would never ask somebody who was very clear about how they never ever wanted to get a vasectomy, right? Like,
sure. And I think that's the key, right? Is like, for some people, they might not even think that like a partner would think that was a good trait or a thing that they would want. That maybe for them, it would be like, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about it. I guess I'll start thinking about that.
oh, I'm ready for the vasectomy only dating app, honestly.
Sure.
Amazing. Now, while my ex never asked me to stop having a relationship with the two of you, he did definitely imply that he would prefer if I never spoke to both of you again. So I do think that it is interesting thinking about other relationships in a non-monogamous context, or just, in a situation like the three of us have very entwined partnership that includes a company as well as just a huge amount of history between the three of us. And I do think that I have known people who have metamors, and they say to me, like, I really want my partner to break up with that person. I really think that they should break up with that person. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's an okay thing for you to say to them.
Well, yeah, so much of non-monogamy drama can fall into that weird gray area of how much can we ask someone to change the nature of their relationship with somebody else, or change the amount of time that they've spent with somebody else.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's not a non-monogamy only issue. Like, even monogamous folks struggle with that of, can I ask my partner to not spend as much time with their friends that I hate, or that get under my
like every time
skin?
you are with that friend, you do something stupid or you get too drunk or whatever. I wish you wouldn't do that. Yeah, like that is tricky. I was just thinking about this recently because there is that weird thing when you're non-monogamous and your partners have other partners. And it's like, if you think about comparing that to a friend who is dating other people, it's like a certain amount that they'll tell you about that, and a certain amount you might weigh in on your opinions of it. But when you're both dating that person, we can often fall into this area where it feels weirder to give advice or process that with your other partners, right? And we've talked about that a lot, how like generally that's kind of crossing a weird line into processing one relationship with another relationship. Is weird. But I was thinking about this because I have a friend who, she had this partner, and there'd been like a number of times where she'd been kind of upset about things that had happened in that relationship. Nothing huge or major, but just I noticed this repeating pattern. And I found myself falling into this kind of like, should I express any of this to her? Like, how can I do that in a way that's not trying to pit me against this partner of hers? And she and I don't have a sexual relationship. We just have like a nice, affectionate friendship. But I found myself still struggling a little bit with that dynamic, and eventually did end up saying like, hey, you guys have your own thing. I just feel like sometimes I get the impression that he may not treat you as well as someone should. And for her, that was like a big turning point, like a big positive turning point, where she was like, oh my gosh, yes, like that's so true. But then I thought, like, if I'd done the same thing and she was a partner, would I have felt like I'd made a mistake, even if she felt like that was positive? And so I do think that's an interesting area too to look at, of like, there is a lot of nuance there.
Yeah. Someone totally did that with me, and it did make me start thinking about, oh God, maybe I shouldn't be in this relationship anymore. And then I got out of it, and it was a partner who said that to me about my other partner.
So that's that weird thing of like, most
really
of us
sticky.
would go, yuck, 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 nope, nope, nope.
And
Even if for you it was positive.
Well, in the moment it was kind of yuck. It was like, whoa, I don't know if you should have said that. But then it is that question of like, am I feeling this because I'm worried about what that partner thinks of me, or are they planting the seed in my head, or has it been there all along, and it's sort of giving me more of the impetus to say, okay, maybe there is something here that I need to explore further, and maybe this isn't as positive in my life as I'm pretending that it is. So it is that question.
Okay, so
it's
really
all
gray areas. It's all gray areas all the way down. Gray areas and fractals. Can I give the people something concrete?
Yeah, sure.
Can I throw a bone into their
Goodness.
mouth, directly into their mouth for them to chew on?
A vegan
please?
chicken bone, yes.
I'm confused. Are we throwing these vegan chicken bones on the floor and telling them to pick them up, or are we throwing them into their mouths
No,
to eat?
they're all my little puppies.
There you
and
go.
I'm going to give them little milk bones.
Okay,
Vegan milk
okay.
bones
Vegan
to
milk
chew
bone.
on.
God.
Okay, I just want to plant my milk bone in the ground here to give people some, at the very least, some red flags to consider around a request to change.
Some buoys. I love it.
Yeah.
Buoys, yes. So, like, just be careful of any request for change that creates distance rather than creating closeness. if closeness is what you want in the relationship. Be careful of any request for change that enforces control rather than promoting your growth together in the relationship.
That's a big one.
Be careful of any requests for change that are accompanied with direct threats as well. Again, that also contains the gray area of like, if someone is honest with you about how like, I don't know if I can be in this relationship much longer if things don't change. If you're upset and activated, that can probably feel like a threat. But yeah, if someone's like threatening you, especially if they're threatening you with some kind of harm, if you don't change, major red flag. If a partner makes a request for change that's demanded just immediately without any discussion or understanding or negotiation, be on the lookout for that. Any requests for change that directly isolate you from your support systems or that are requiring you to give up your autonomy fully. So if something is triggered in you where you feel like this feels unacceptable, this is another little rubric to go through. Like, does it hit on any of these? It could be that whatever the request is, it truly does stray into some kind of sacred territory for you that feels too close to home, and that's okay. Or it could be a reasonable request, but there's something about it or something about the way it was asked that strikes a nerve and is making it feel like this is a survival threat level issue, which is a great thing to explore in therapy and get an outside perspective on that.
Yeah, I think a key thing that I've taken away from this discussion is how important it is to recognize all the stuff we've said about how to ask for a change well as how to receive that request for a change well, while acknowledging that also saying, no, I'm not willing to change that is an answer that's also okay. Like that may be the case, that just the answer is no, I'm not willing to do that. Even if it doesn't hit these red flags, you could still do that. The consequence might be losing that relationship, but that also could be okay. Like that might just be a sign that there's some incompatibility there. So I do want to say with all of this, it's like there's not some perfect formula where people will always accept your change requests or that you always have to accept theirs as long as they don't fall into these categories. It's also important for us to realize we need to find the people that we're compatible with and that we're willing to change in the right similar ways that feel good for us.
This conversation would not be complete without hearing from you listeners out there. So this week on our Instagram stories, we are asking the question, what types of changes are acceptable for a partner to ask for from you? Again, you can go to multiamory_podcast, check out our stories to answer that question, and we will repost your answers. The best place to share your thoughts about this episode with other listeners is in our episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Jace Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker Winston. Our production assistants are Rachel Shennework and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. Full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.